everyone. I'm Michelle Weiss, and he is Michael Horn. And we have a really important set of topics to discuss today.
Yeah, and I can't wait to dig into them, Michelle, because they all revolve around this that no matter what your next step is after high school, exposing yourself to a variety of careers, connecting with adults in the working world, viewing your peers as part of your network that will help you make progress, all of that is going to be important. And this, frankly, is advice for whether you're going to college after high school, maybe you're entering the working world, you're taking an apprenticeship, you're going in the military, or maybe you're even doing a college alternative or a gap year experience.
Yeah, and we also want you all to be involved in this program as well. And so we ask that you use the Q&A button on your Zoom display to submit your questions. Sometimes it's hard for us to find your questions within the chat, but we also use the chat just for regular discussion. So please go in there now and share with everyone, not just the host and panelists, where you're joining us from today. Today, we are going to be talking quite a bit about first-gen learners. And for those of you who may not be 100% sure exactly what this term means, first-generation learner is actually someone whose parents or parent did not complete a four-year college or university degree. And the reason why this is important is because it's not only sort of a particular kind of issue, it's very much tied to what we're seeing in terms of changing demographics and an increased diversity of needs as we think about our learners. For most schools in most areas of the country, we're going to be actually having to ultimately shift away from serving learners or people that we've been comfortable serving in the past. Part of the interesting thing about sort of the recession of 2008 is that there was what Nathan Graw calls a birth dearth, meaning we didn't have enough babies. And also the number of babies that are kind of emerging who are kind of coming into the college and career space is far lower than ever before. And the number of high school graduates we actually had peaked back in 2013. And we're also seeing this kind of declining number of white non-Hispanic learners and kind of moving towards this minority majority coming up in the 2040s or 2050s. And so all of this stuff is kind of intricately and interdependent of one another. And to help us unpack what this means and how we should best serve our first generation learners of color, we have an incredible guest today. It's Sheila Sarem, who's the CEO and founder of BASTA, a nonprofit committed to bridging the college to career gap for first generation college goers of color.
And Michelle, I cannot wait to learn from this conversation. So I'm going to step aside, let you do the interview and the conversation, and I'll be back on the flip side with questions from our audience. So make sure you keep submitting those.
Sounds good, Michael. Welcome, Sheila, to the show. It's so good to see you.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you for that kind introduction.
Yeah, so I would love for you to kind of tell us a little bit about your personal story, your pathway, how you started BASTA. Did you have a direct path to get to where you are today, or was it more like what Michael and I like to talk about as spaghetti pathway?
I think it definitely falls in the spaghetti range. So I'll share like my quick background, which really truly did not make sense as I was going along, but really made sense once I discovered my desire and want to launch BASTA. So I graduated from college with no idea what I wanted to do and waited tables after college. That's what I had done while I was in college. I am first generation American, and so had not really just had natural exposure to the kinds of jobs that are out there. Just to put it in perspective, it was during graduation, I turned to the person next to me during the ceremony to ask what he was doing after college, and he said he was going into consulting, and I had never heard the word consulting uttered in my life. So in any case, I started off my career working in the private sector, mostly in tech, and learned a ton, but wasn't really personally jazzed by tech. And so I'd always been really interested in politics and political campaigns. And in 2008, we had a pretty big presidential election. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to make this leap from private sector into political campaigns. did that for a couple years, found that it didn't really, I like doing stuff that made my heart sing, but I wasn't a campaigner for life, and then ended up working in education for 7 years. And so that's where I really got exposure to the learners that you're talking about, students who were, growing up in communities where the schooling options weren't always fantastic, who, if they were college bound, were going to be the first in their family to go to college and likely were going to be eligible for Pell Grants. And was hearing sort of our promise to them, which was like, go to college and everything else will be fine and work out for you. And feeling like I wasn't sure that was entirely true. And so, the private sector background, the political campaigns, the stint in education, all of that sort of came together when I launched BASTA. But I can't say that I charted the path there. I think it was really learning by doing, and then making decisions along the way.
Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit about sort of the naming of BASTA? What does it mean?
Basta means enough in Spanish and Italian. So you can take that one of two ways. Either we are enough and we are ready for the world of work, or you can say enough of the status quo. So it's up to you. It's up for interpretation.
Awesome. And I know that your fellowship and also the different kinds of programs you facilitate really are homing in on first generation learners of color who are moving from college into the world of work. Some of our viewers and families and folks who are listening in are definitely kind of moving into the college pathway. Others may be thinking about moving directly into the workforce or alternative pathways. And I wonder if there are just sort of specific insights you might be able to share from what you've learned along the way about this transition from education to work.
Yeah. I think our first program, like you named, is for late stage college students who are about to make the leap from college into work. And I think what we've realized is everything we're learning about what we wish late stage college students knew about the world of work, they could be learning way earlier. And so I think that the most important thing I think we need to illuminate for young people, whether you're a counselor or a parent or an advisor, is everything that they're doing, whether it's a club that they're a part of, whether it's a class they're in that they feel really good about, whether it's an after school program where they feel like they really get to shine, whatever it is, all of those things are inputs to how do I want to shape my future life and my future career. We often find when we meet learners who are, trying to grapple with what they want to do with their lives, they're not thinking about any of the experiences they've had along the way that absolutely will tell them what they like and don't like. So a young person will be like, I want to be a software engineer. And we'll say, do you like working in front of the computer on your own for like a few hours of the day? Like, do you like sometimes an introvert? Not at all. I want all my time to be with other people. So they haven't really processed that they have all the inputs that, we should talk about this. They don't have all the inputs they need, but they do have inputs along the way. And I don't think as the folks in their corner, whether you are a caregiver or a counselor, or an advisor, or a teacher or a coach, we're not, I think, asking the right questions to help them sense make and realize that they are getting a lot of the inputs that can help them make decisions about their post-high school opportunities and ultimately their careers.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And we're going to go into that in a little bit. I think what might be kind of helpful is you and your team have done an incredible job of pulling out data-driven insights from the thousands of people you have served over the last few years. And I would love for you to kind of walk us through some of these core elements. I know that in one way that you frame it, you have kind of 4 elements around clarity, alignment, searching, and advancing. Wondering if you could kind of walk us through some of these pieces. And we have some of this data to share with all of you as well.
Sure. Yeah. So when we work with young people, they're coming to us saying, I want to get a job or I want to get an internship. And oftentimes what we've learned is that that is not the moment to say, great, let me look at your resume, or great, let's start looking at internship opportunities together. That's the moment to stop and say, okay, let's learn more about you. What do you like? What are your strengths? What do you enjoy doing? What do people compliment you on? What do you want to do more of? And we have to start there, because if we don't start there, then young people are sort of going through the motions and not super clear on why they're making the decisions they're making. And so we sort of think about getting a job along 4 key milestones. The first is clarity. That's the sort of work of helping young people excavate their own strengths and interests. And then once we've done that, then we can start working with young people to think about, how do my strengths and interests actually connect to the world of work? That's alignment. And once we've done those 2 things with young people, then we can move to that next phase, which is, okay, like, how do you get a job in this field that you like? Maybe it requires advanced education. Maybe it requires a niche skill set. Maybe it doesn't, and that's really helpful. And then finally, what's it like to interview for that particular job? We always use the tech interview, the coding interview, as a specific example. It's completely different than any other kind of interview that you're going to do. And so if you don't get at-bats, if you don't get practice, if you don't get to hear from professionals who've done those interviews, it can be really hard to nail it if you haven't had practice. I'll say one thing. I think these questions, who am I? What do I care about? And how does that connect to the world of work, are universal. And so even as a young person is selecting their post-high school opportunity, sort of what college they choose to go to, who am I? What do I care about? How does that connect to the college I'm selecting? Picking their major. Who am I? What do I care about? How does that major connect to the things that I want to do in my life? And we just find that that integration isn't happening naturally. And then we'll talk about this more, but for first generation college students who haven't sort of grown up at the dinner table with a consultant at the table or a financial advisor or all of the sort of what BASTA we call career pathway jobs, they haven't had that natural exposure. And so they don't have those inputs as they're making those decisions. And so we think it's critically important that we spend time on the front end, making sure that they can connect the dots between who they are, what they care about, and how they're making practical decisions that will have an impact on the rest of their lives.
Yeah. And one of the really interesting things, and you mentioned it when you talked about alignment, but I remember seeing from the data that you guys have exposed, alignment is really fascinating because it gets at sort of our motivations as human beings. And we all have very different kinds of motivations, right? Like some of us are actually quite motivated by money for very specific reasons. We need to kind of earn our way into moving out of this kind of hustle to survive, or whatever the thing may be. And you were showing that without enough exposure to the right industries, people are definitely kind of moving in pathways that conflict with their actual motivations. I'm wondering if you could kind of tease that out a little bit more.
Yeah. So I shared a little bit about sort of how we think about the journey of discovery leading you to a great job. You had mentioned earlier that we've collected thousands of data points on young people, which we have through our programs. And we did some analysis on all the data to understand what is the most important finding. Like what's the thing that's going to most impact a young person's ability to get a great job that they want? And that was this notion of exposure, and exposure defined very sort of in layperson's terms, which are my terms. So that's what I understand is a young person who knows a little bit about a lot of industries. So it's pretty general. And what we ultimately found is students who know a little bit about a lot of industries are picking jobs and are doing interviews are picking jobs that are more aligned to what they want to do. And are more successful in their interview processes. So we looked at exposure. We looked at things like financial need. We looked at race and ethnicity, demographics. We looked at a ton of stuff to understand a young person's likelihood to get a great job. And exposure was the most important thing that we identified. And so we looked at why does exposure matter so much? And you were getting at this a little bit, but one of the things that we realized is without exposure, young people, to your point, were sort of misaligned on what they thought they wanted to do and the things that drive them most elementally. And so where that came up most often for first generation college students, we looked at our first generation college student learners, was students who said they cared a ton about income, were disproportionately picking the medical field as their field of choice. Students who said they cared a lot about relationship building were disproportionately picking finance as their field of choice. For students who said they cared about status was the thing that they're most looking for in their job search. And I would argue status is as substantiated as income, right? Maybe you have a really technical degree and you want to use that when you graduate. But students who are picking status are disproportionately picking careers in HR. So we just saw patterns of misalignment between what the learner said they most wanted in that first job and then the field they were picking. And so that leads us to believe we need to be doing more to help young people unpack and understand who they are, but also what is the job market? What's out there for you? Not just to pick that post-college job, but in the case of a high school student, starting to sort of map what their educational experiences will be like along the way. I'll say one more thing on this because I think it's useful to all of us. You might think you care a lot about income, and then you spend some time in a role that's really income driven and you go, man, I do care about income, but actually quality of life matters more to me. And I think the earlier we provide learners the tools to have those conversations with themselves, the more likely they're going to be to end up happy, fulfilled, and in a role where they can be successful. So we don't need to wait. We can start that journey with young people as early as possible. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, and I'm just
on.
no, and I'm curious, like as we talk about exposure to careers and industries, I think a lot of the stuff that's kind of in the ether revolve around apprenticeships and internships and jobs and volunteering. I'm wondering if you might be able to just share briefly how young people might think about internships and paid internships and how to secure one, because it seems like this necessarily entails having a strong network. Is that true, or how might we think about this?
Networks accelerate access to absolutely every milestone that a young person is seeking in their lives. At BASTA, we call that sort of social capital. We are not the only people using that term, but yeah, networks are critically important. And we have found that networks, when we look at our data are just an accelerant to everything that a young person is trying to achieve. When we look at the networks of first gen college students, we find that they are predisposed to having really strong peer networks, which peer networks are wonderful because they help you along the way, help you feel supported, help you feel like you belong. Where young people need help, need support, is access to more professional networks. So those are the people who can pass your resume along, right, under the radar, or informally refer you to an opportunity, which if we think about how, life works and job markets work, that's super important. My neighbor reached out to me the other day and said, my high school daughter doesn't have a summer opportunity and she's going away to college next year and she's panicking. Can you help her? Right? That's just how we operate. And so having those, creating opportunities for first generation college students and learners to build those professional networks is really, really important. And I think the other thing that's really important is that I think what we discovered in our work with first generation college students is an overwhelming belief that they got to do it on their own. And so normalizing everyone is getting help. Everyone uses help along the way is super important. I just a minute ago, you guys flashed up a bit of a slide about academic performance. And I think what we saw when we looked at our data about academic performance, we had thought, oh, well, the young people that are doing really well in school, surely they have a much better idea of what they want to do and how they want to use their degree. But ultimately, that's not what we found. Whether a young person had a really great GPA or, a GPA that that might need some work, we found really not so much difference in sort of how much they knew about the world of work. And so we can sort of um, maybe make some deductions from that, that academic performance alone is not increasing your odds of getting a great job. And so what is? Access to networks, people who can help you understand the world of work more easily as long as you're going through your academic journey.
Yeah. Yeah. And it very much connects with that idea that you had mentioned before. It's like as you're in getting a little bit of exposure to a particular job or a kind of work, you might realize what you do and don't like about that opportunity. It very much connects with we had Kathy Davies on to talk about designing your life. And part of understanding what you do want to do is understanding what you really don't want to do. Sheila, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, it's that spaghetti approach to the career. Like that spaghetti eventually makes sense over time, but that's okay if it feels like spaghetti along the way.
Yep, yep. And then it all makes sense in retrospect when we look back on it. I want to bring on a special guest that you have invited. She is one of your former fellows, Nia Rayner. Welcome to the show. You are a former BASTA fellow, and you currently actually work as a resume coach for the BASTA program, and you're also the author of Rise: How to Overcome Challenges to Live the Life You Want. Nia, welcome.
Thank you, Michelle, for having me. Hi, Sheila.
Hi.
Can you tell us a little bit about your pathway and what it's been like so far?
Yeah, for sure. So, as part of the BASTA program, I am a first generation college student myself. I graduated from High Point University in North Carolina with a bachelor's in international business with Spanish minor. And additionally, while I was working on my master's at HPU as well, that's when I took on my first full time role at Rollworks, a division of Nextroll Incorporated, as a sales development representative. So, working on those two paths at the same time have been an extraordinary challenge, but I was able to pursue it. And I just finished that degree as well. And I am also an author of Rise: How to Overcome Challenges in Order to Live the Life That You Want, which is a book about overcoming those challenges that is more catered to first generation college students, first time entrepreneurs, and people that identify as people of color that want to have these really big dreams for themselves, but because of the backgrounds that we come from, we feel like it's not possible.
I wonder, Nia, if, because sometimes when we talk to younger learners, some may think, I just really need to grapple with what is in front of me right now. And for some, it's getting into college. For others, it's getting a good job. Or I don't really I need to kind of figure out what is in the near term next versus thinking about kind of my longer term career. What might you say to them? And what do you wish you had known earlier on in the process?
Yeah, so I was definitely one of those people. I went to a performing arts high school in New York City thinking that I was going to be a artist in the future. I studied vocal music with a concentration in opera. And I said to myself, this is going to be the best thing that I want to do. And then I went through the program and I realized that I did not want to pursue music professionally. So what helped me succeed in high school and get into college is just having this quote that I love from Tony Robbins. And he says, stay committed in your decisions, but stay flexible in your approach. So try everything, take a lesson from everything that you encounter. So being able to get involved on your school organization. So if your school has a art club, a dance club, if they have business organizations like Future Business Leadership of America or DECA, any of those organizations, sports too, that you feel that would be a great fit for you, try them out. If you don't like it, that's okay. And if there's something that you want to start at your school, but they don't have it, talk to your school admin and see what can be done to bring that onto your school. And what matters is bringing on that leadership experience for yourself, making that legacy at your school, and giving yourself kind of like a portfolio for future college opportunities and showcasing what you've done in the past 4 years at your high school and make yourself a good candidate for college and beyond.
That's awesome. And you work as a resume coach for BASTA. And I know you've also thought a lot about the idea of personal branding. And I'm wondering, as you think about your experience, why is it so hard for a lot of students to create a resume, and how do you help them? And what do you think makes a great resume?
Yeah, for sure. So I think what's really challenging for incoming professionals and students is they have all these great goals into what they want to do, but they feel that their current experience is lacking.
Mm.
Whether it's what Sheila was saying before, how she worked at a restaurant in college. I was an RA in college and took on other part time internships and opportunities. Sometimes when we take on these opportunities and we don't feel that they necessarily align with what we want to do, we kind of freak out and we automatically dismiss ourselves when it comes to that job application that we're really interested in applying for. And we say, I don't think I'm qualified enough because I don't know X, Y, and Z. I don't know this skill, whatnot. But what's really important is making sure that you are showcasing your soft skills. How well are you communicating with other people? How are you able to drive results in your opportunities that you've had in the past? So when I take a look at a resume, I think about, is this student showcasing what they are able to accomplish at a future organization? So one of my favorite tools I like to use when I review a resume is Google's XYZ formula. Accomplished X as measured by Y by doing Z. And that's something that I really like using because it shows, even if you're applying for a marketing internship and you didn't necessarily have that marketing experience in the past, but you've done social media for your school club or whatnot, you could say, I increase the social media presence on Instagram by 50%, measured by the Instagram analytics by posting X amount of times per day and promoting our school organization, whatnot. So just having that mindset of being able to showcase what you have and just putting your best foot forward in everything you want to do, that's going to get you that internship. That's going to help you get those fellowships, those networking opportunities, and overall that first time job.
Yeah. I remember learning about this kind of formula too, Sheila, from you, when you were kind of walking me through how someone might be able to equate where you normally wouldn't equate, maybe working at Target as a manager along
Yeah.
as just as the equivalent of, getting that internship for McKinsey or for some random hedge fund, right? Like that you can actually, if you talk about these things in the right way and use numbers, right? Like you talk a lot about this idea of translating into the language of the labor market.
Yeah, I just the work that Nia just talked about, like the work we do with young people and the resume coaches do with young people to help them like excavate or write their resume bullets. What we're really doing, what's embedded in that, is helping them to understand just the breadth and depth of the work they've done. The example I always share is there was a young man who did the program years ago, pre-COVID, so really years ago, and he was like, "Ugh, all I've done is work at H&M." And I just remember he was pretty down on himself that he'd been working at H&M through his entire college experience. And so we dug in a little bit, and he's like, no, I promise I've only worked in retail, for my whole college experience. Dig in a little more. Oh, it turns out he works at the retail store in Times Square. So the highest grossing retail store in the country. And actually, he manages the register. So at the end of the night, he calls HQ to say sort of what the register numbers are when they're closing. And so we sort of went through that, and it was like, whoa, like, do you realize the level of trust that has been instilled in you to be able to do that? And how much money is that you're sort of responsible for every day? And that's when we start to really get at, this is a super valuable experience, whatever field you want to go into next. And so I think what we try to do is, Nia, you are such like a beautifully self-assured person, and you are like, let me try things, and if they don't work, let me try something out, and let me integrate that into my experience. And sometimes young people don't come with that sort of asset-based impression of themselves. And so interestingly, a resume is a really great place to start to build some of that. Actually, you've done some really amazing stuff. Let's help you connect those dots between the work you've done and why you are absolutely equipped and ready to go into the workforce. And I think the other thing, Nia, that you shared is you just got to try a bunch of stuff, right? I think a lot of young people that we meet they've already imagined themselves in that media club or playing in that, I don't know, like informal softball league or whatever it might be. And they're like, I'm not going to like it. And it's like, no, you got to try. You got to just try
Mhm.
it all. Maybe you won't like softball, but you'll like being part of a team. Maybe you won't like, whatever aspect of this club, but you'll like something. You'll realize you're an awesome treasurer. Who knows? And so we really do. I think, Nia, you said it so beautifully. And it's never too early to start. And hey, oh, by the way, you build your network that way, right? Those people all become part of your network as you move through your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring back Michael to join us because he's been kind of looking through all of the chat and also some of the questions coming up, so we can make sure we're getting to some of those. Hey, Michael.
Hey, this has been a great conversation, and we're seeing a lot of questions. So maybe Nia, I'll direct this one to you first, and then Sheila, you can jump in on the back half as well. And it's sort of a two-parter. I'm combining questions from folks, but it's how critical is it for my kid to have a LinkedIn account is the first part. And then the second one is how can you use that LinkedIn account to build your network?
Wow. I am a huge advocate of LinkedIn for the following reasons. The way that the LinkedIn algorithm works, every time you post something, every time you update your profile, there is a special algorithm that allows your profile to be seen towards a lot of people and could get you access to the right people that you want for your network. So I've seen students as young as 13 years old having a LinkedIn account is because they want to be in front of those potential partners for college and those future job opportunities. So I would definitely say the earlier you could get on LinkedIn, the better. Being able to showcase what you've done in school, whether you're a college athlete or like my prior self, I was an opera singer in high school. Being able to showcase your talents, the club leadership experiences that you had, and even those first jobs that you have, even at a restaurant or in retail, like what Sheila was saying before. So the earlier you could showcase yourself, the better. LinkedIn's the most powerful platform to do that. And you have the opportunity to connect with people in certain realms and ask for informational interviews, take a look at certain events that people are having for networking. So I would definitely say the earlier the better.
Super helpful. I think you actually said quite a bit there. So Sheila, let me turn to you on this next question because that was comprehensive. Thank you, Nia. The next question is, how do you tactically break down what networking really is and the underlying skills, they use the word micro skills that are involved to really build comfort and confidence for a novice who maybe isn't familiar with networking? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's two things we find that we need to do in parallel. I'll start with the harder one first, which is just debunking all the myths about what networking is. I'll use the LinkedIn example. When we launched BASTA and we started to have networking events, we found like young people sort of had a mentality of, I must meet this person, I must connect with them on LinkedIn, and then I can walk away. Like it's very sort of transactional. There is a means to an end, and when I achieve that, checkbox, I'm done. And so there is a sort of debunking a bunch of myths about what networking is. It's not transactional. Your goal is not to amass as many LinkedIn connections as possible. Your goal is not to just talk to 7 people and then leave the room. Your goal is really to build meaningful relationships with people, right? And that mindset shift is hard because of the way we think about networking, but easy because of the way we operate as human beings. So it's like, just be a human being. What makes it more valuable for young people, I think, is when we remind them that one, the folks they're meeting along the way can help them answer questions that can help them make smarter decisions for themselves. So using that clarity, alignment, job search strategy, who am I, what do I care about, how does that connect to the world of work? People can accelerate the way that you answer those questions. And so really making it more about what's the exchange that you're having with individuals, not what's the transactional kind of achievement every time you have a conversation with someone, that we found to be really critically important. And then I think the sort of the debunking myth part, I'll end with this. Nobody is doing this alone, and people like to help each other. Like those two ideas, nobody is doing this alone, and people like to help each other. I almost never have a conversation with a young person when they thank me where I don't say, I'm also doing this for me. Like, it feels good to help you, right? Like, reminding people that this exchange is a sort of natural thing that people like doing, and I wouldn't do it if I didn't want to do it. Is, I think, just a really helpful reminder to young people. They're not inconveniencing me by asking me for help. I just think that we continue to just make sure that that's part of how we talk to young people. The last thing I'll share on this is everybody has a built-in network. Everyone has people in their corner that want to help them. And young people always come into the program going, I don't have a network. So if you watch my one more thing at the end of this, we'll share more just tactics about how to help people excavate their networks. But we all have a baseline network of people who want to help us and people who can share interesting information with us. And it's just about sort of being diligent about growing that network over time.
It's a great tease for what's to come. But before we let you off the hook, one more question from the audience. We got several, so apologies, but we're going to pick one more. And this is around, I think it's from a school counselor who's asking the question of, we're seeing a lot of badges and certificates and pop up all over the place right now across the landscape. And a lot of these are around like workforce communication skills or workplace emotional intelligence, or things like in the quote unquote soft skills, credentialing area and stuff like that. Are you seeing that as being helpful right now, Sheila, in the area of getting that first job, or is that more noise in your view?
Well, you did not decide to throw me a softball. This is a tough one. So let me answer it honestly and somewhat carefully. Learning is always great, right? Learning is always great. And so if it is a soft skill like credential or badge, I think getting some insight on how useful it's been to other people who have gone through it is really helpful. So I'd ask those questions as a counselor too. What feedback do you have? What evidence do you have that this has been a useful learning experience? I'll say that one. I think the other thing I would say is, do we have evidence that this particular micro credential, this badge, is actually gaining traction with employers or whomever it is that it's designed to gain traction with? There is a sort of proliferation of a bunch of non-degree type certificates, for lack of better words. And so some of them are going to land and have traction, and some of them are not. I think as a counselor, as you're thinking about what to recommend to the young people who are trusting you with how to use their valuable time, I think two things. Is this a quality learning experience? And then two, do we have evidence that this is fast tracking people into those opportunities that they want? I think what I've seen in the space is a lot of badges and credentials, all with good intent, but not all lead to the kind of outcomes that the badge designer was intending. So I think just asking some critical questions to separate the more useful from the less useful, which is, I think the approach we take to everything in life. And so having that same critical lens.
Sheila, Nia, thank you guys so much for joining us. Michael and I are just going to take a few moments to digest what you have shared with us. But thank you again. And we're excited to share some of these resources that you all have developed with our larger audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, Michael.
Wow, what a conversation, Michelle.
Yeah, what were you thinking as you were listening?
Gosh, my head went to a few different spots. I'll give you one, and then maybe you can jump in with one, and we'll trade a few of them. But the first one that I thought of was how important it is to make the shift from like being to doing. So like the example that Sheila gave was like, oh, I want to be a software engineer because it sounds great. It sounds, exciting. Maybe it makes a lot of money. It's trendy, whatever it is. And then you actually ask like, well, what does a software engineer do? Like, what's their day-to-day job actually look like? And that's when you have the clues of, is this something that's going to actually line up, right, with something that I want to do as well? And I love how she said, learners and individuals have a lot of that information already. just look at your own things that you on a day-to-day basis, and what do you like from it? What don't you like? And this really connects, frankly, I think, to the conversation that we had, as you mentioned, with Kathy Davies, about getting specific about what brings you energy, what drains it, and where your strengths lie. And then you can start to think about the alignment to the opportunities out there, but really taking a step back to the actual doing before you jump into the being. What
Yeah.
about you?
Yeah, that very much connects to what I was thinking about, which is so much of this revolves around building confidence, right? And I think when we don't know what we don't know, we lack the confidence to really kind of explore and assess and assess what works for us and what doesn't. I think what's fascinating about Sheila's work is she's obviously working with younger learners, but we also have millions upon millions of adult learners who are actually first generation learners as well. They grew up in families where the parents did not, attend college. And one of the sort of constant and recurring themes that comes out of research on adult learners, first generation learners, is this lack of confidence of not knowing how to navigate a way forward because of this trepidation. And I think what we keep hearing is the need to explore, to get exposed, to touch and feel, to do, and then realize, right, what does or does not bring us that energy. And I think what we can maybe pull away from this concentration on a particular kind of learner, for me, feels a lot like what people talk about in terms of this idea of curb cut effects. When you actually kind of home in on the pain points of people who are maybe underserved or underestimated right now, we can actually open up opportunities for everyone through more usable, accessible, and universal design. And I think this is huge as we think about, sloped curbs, opening up avenues for people who are in wheelchairs. It also opens up accessibility to all of us, right? When we're pushing strollers or we're pulling dollies or pulling our luggage or skateboarding or bicycling, right? It's this idea of, if we kind of home in on some of the challenges, and one of this seems to be around exposure and confidence building, we can begin to kind of tailor our messaging, our interventions a little bit more effectively for this changing population of learners.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Michelle, and I'll just double down on that piece, because that struck me as well. And the comment that really hung with me, and I wrote it down, was when Sheila said that she had never heard of consulting before. And I thought, well, I didn't know what consulting was either when I went
Me
to
neither.
college.
Yeah.
I had never heard of McKinsey until like senior year or something like that. And didn't have much of a clue. And you realize, whether it's that or Tony Jack, the Harvard professor, writes this book about sort of the code, right, of academic language, that office hours, a lot of first gen students assume, well, that's when the professor has their head down and is working and not to be disturbed, instead of, oh, gee, you're supposed to come in and ask questions then. But again, it turns out that a lot of us who maybe had parents that went to college or went to schools where you had good relationships with teachers, you still don't know that you're supposed to go in and ask questions. You still don't know what consulting is. You don't know. I always use this example. Someone who grew up inside Washington, D.C., I didn't know what an engineer was, right? Like, you go on and on and on. And you realize that if you start to design for first gen students that maybe don't have these experiences, don't have this understanding, it's just better experience for everyone. And so you really improve that experience. And I think that's a big takeaway. And it bleeds into the third one that I had, which is, maybe we can wrap up after this, but just the importance of knowing a little bit about a lot of industries, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was fascinating how Sheila said it. And I just want to hit this over and over again. That's more important than any other factor in getting a great first job.
Mm-hmm.
And it allows you to optimize earlier. And she made that comment about, you might realize that income is not the most important thing, and make a trade-off around that. And actually, like, super relevant, this new book I'm working on about helping people get a first job and change jobs. One of the people we interviewed took a job for $30,000 less money. We were like, what are you doing, when we talked to him? And he was like, well, I know what's involved in it. I know what brings me energy. And I am happy to take less money as a trade-off that I want to make so that I get to do these other things that I really love to do. And you can't make that sort of trade-off, right? That intentional decision, unless you have exposure to a lot of industries and this sort of understanding. And so that comment really rung true with me. And it strikes me, it really gets at what causes people to make better choices, Michelle.
Yeah. Yeah. We didn't kind of like home in on it, but it was showing on the screen this idea that you're 90% more likely to get a first interview if you actually have some exposure to that industry. And then those folks, 100% of them are more likely to actually get the second interview. Yep, right here. You're 1.9 times more likely, right, to secure that first interview, and then you're more likely to get that second interview. And so, yeah, just such important stuff coming out of real world data that they're learning from these fellows.
Yeah.
Mike, you want to close this out?
Yeah, let's do it. I mean, we're excited for new content that we're going to be bringing to you this summer. We're going to be talking to our friend Matt Siegelman of Burning Glass Institute about the different post-secondary pathways that are available. Not everything has to go through the bachelor's degree. And we will also be doing more on the subject that we touched on today around personal branding. So we're excited for those conversations, Michelle.
Yeah, and our friends on the college side of CGN have a program next Thursday that looks into Hispanic serving institutions. And there is a link to register and get more details in the chat.
I was just on the campus of a Hispanic serving institution, so I can't wait to tune in for that show. And of course, for all of you tuning in today, we would love to get your feedback on today's program. Please fill out the brief survey after we sign off. And by doing so, you get entered into a drawing for a $50 Amazon gift card.
Thank you all for joining us. And as always on this show, our guest gets the last word with one last thing. Sheila, take it away.
Hi, this is Sheila from BASTA coming at you with one more thing. The most common thing we hear from students is that they don't believe that they have a network, and I'm here to tell you that you absolutely do. So when you're done listening to this, I want to challenge you to try something. Go ahead and sit down with a notepad. That might be a pen and pencil, or it might be the Notes app on your phone. Make sure you have a timer nearby, so you may also use your phone for that. And then I want you to set the timer for 2 minutes. And in that 2 minutes, I want you to write down the names of absolutely every one of your peers who might fit the following criteria. It might be another peer in a class, maybe a classmate that you just think says really smart stuff and that you kind of look up to. It might be a young person in a club or organization or a sports team you in that you feel like exhibits a really unique kind of leadership. You might have an after-school job or a volunteer gig, and there's somebody within that program that you think is just a really creative thinker. Those peers, those people, those folks are your network. And so write their names down and be really intentional about calling them someone in your network. It's never too early to start. I then want you to reset that timer, and instead of thinking about your peers, think about role models. And role models also come in all shapes, forms, and sizes. You might have a sibling that you really look up to. That person is in your network. You might have a teacher that you think really believes in you or that you think is a really interesting thinker. That person is in your network. Think back again to those clubs and organizations, your after-school sports, maybe the place that you work. Maybe you have a great manager or a coach. Those people are in your network. And so write those names down. And then the next time you are interacting with one of those individuals, the teacher, the coach, the manager at your job, let them know, hey, I sat down to think about who was in my network and you came to mind for me. People always love knowing that you think about them as someone in your network. So you have a network, it's sitting right in front of you. Sit down, set that timer, and figure out who those people are.